How's it going, everyone? Thanks for joining me on a new episode of the Music Reviewer Podcast. My name's Josh, and we're just doing a new album review today. This is going to be episode 61, and the album is titled Sour. The artist is Olivia Rodrigo. This one's been sitting on the back burner for a while. It's just right at my cutoff line for an album that's only been out for a month. So yeah, I'm just getting around to this review. I've listened to the album a few times at this point, and obviously it's made quite a footprint in the music industry, and there's been several opinions at this point and some critical acclaim. I'm just going to be giving my thoughts about this album today. And yeah, just kind of excited to finally be talking about this one and finally putting my thoughts out there. But anyways, just before we get started, I want to let everyone know a new episode was released. Another album review was released roughly last week or a few days ago for the latest Japanese breakfast album titled Jubilee. They are a lovely indie rock band project that is fronted by a really talented vocalist and artist overall. Thought it was a pretty good album. I believe that's their third album. If you have some time, check out that album, but also check out the review from the Japanese breakfast album titled Jubilee. Overall, I thought it was a pretty solid project, so check out that review. And just to cover some other things, a new episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week dropped not too long ago. Also, for the week of June 12th, ended up being an interesting week. Kind of like one of those more organic weeks where we get a hodgepodge of tracks from various artists that I think are just kind of like summer bait to see what sticks. We had some Chase Rice and Florida Georgia Line. I got Worst Track of the Week versus Raul Alejandro. I have no idea if I'm saying his name right, a Latin pop artist that dropped a really decent track that I really dug. Also some hip-hop there, a collab from Eminem, Jack Harlow, and Corday, also Coach Ice and Snot, these newer rap artists. And then also like a more, some more heavy-hitting, serious rap, I guess, Lil Baby and Lil Durk, and the late artists MO3 and OG Bobby Williams. We covered a track by them. So yeah, pretty fun week overall. If you have some time, check out that episode of Best and Worst Track of the Week. And as always, just be expecting a new episode to drop here in right after this review, actually. So, we'll be hitting that album bomb from Lil Baby and Lil Durk. So, if you're expecting that at all, or if you're interested in my thoughts on that project, be anticipating that. But anyways, let's go ahead and get into the gist of this review. All right. So once again, the title of the album is Sour. Artist is Olivia Rodrigo. This is her debut album. She is an American actress, singer, songwriter. She is of the school of the Disney child actor, turned mainstream musician. This has gone for, a few generations now. If you really want to go back and look into it, I think artists like Justin Timberlake, Britney Spears, among others at this point. And then some more even recent, more, I guess, relevant ones would include Miley Cyrus, Selena Gomez, Demi Lovato, and countless others, like I said earlier, including Justin Timberlake and people like that. She seems to be what's next in line for this sort of thing out of the Disney factory, quote unquote. And her story from being a mainstream musician kind of is really quite recent, especially if we go back to 2020. From what I researched, she signed a deal to Interscope Records and Geffen Records, which is a subsidiary, I think, of Interscope. Following that, she released her debut single titled Driver's License, which was released in January 2021, literally just a few months ago at this point. This track was massive and ended up being a number one hit in the US among several other countries. And following that massive hit, two other successful singles followed, titled Good For You and Deja Vu. The prominence and success of those singles essentially secured what I think would be a successful musical career for the time being for, a young artist like Olivia Rodrigo. And up until the release of this album, she's honestly been the most interesting thing to be going on in the pop music landscape. And when I mean pop music landscape, I mean like what's going on basically the Billboard Hot 100 and Top 40, stuff like that. Pop is a massive genre, of course, and I don't mean it like if we're including maybe like indie pop, and if we're expanding that far out. But if we're just focusing on what mainstream pop and what I guess the youth is listening to, she's basically been it this year. The fast rise to essentially being this pop sensation with a swift album rollout is honestly quite impressive. And while I wasn't too sold on the first single, Driver's License, or Good For You, I reviewed those tracks on Best and Worst Track of the Week, up until this point, so starting in January. I actually did find myself enjoying Deja Vu, which was the second single. In a sense, it did remind me a bit of Lorde at many points, especially with the soft vocal delivery she accomplishes so easily. I'm just not sure what that means, though. If there's something more, like the record industry essentially used her as a delayed response in finding the American answer to Lorde's massive worldwide success. And I guess it's working, obviously, with how commercially successful this is and how much critical acclaim has been given to this debut album from this relatively fresh artist. Do I think it's a direct parallel? No, not really. I don't think Lorde and Olivia Rodrigo are really all that similar. It's not really fair to compare the two, but if you can kind of, listen to what's going on some tracks, especially on this album here, a lot of the ways I hear the vocals being implemented and the soft vocal timbre and delivery on many tracks. There's a raspiness that I can sort of see why, someone would think she is of a similar school of artists that have, been influenced by Lorde. And upon listening to this album, I've been sitting on this for a while. I've been giving some time to think about it. And really where my thoughts are going with this, since like I said earlier, I've been sitting on this for quite some time. A lot of people have really already given their consensus on what this album, what this album is, whether it's good or not. Mainly it's been positive, which I do see a lot of good in this album. I just don't know if it really just goes beyond what I was expecting this to be, which obviously it's a pop album catering to a certain audience, I think, that wants to hear music that is a little edgy at points, a little sensitive, but also presented in, quite an accessible way, which obviously that's what pop music does. But I don't know if it really goes beyond that. I haven't really been hearing much other than this is just a pretty standard pop album with some talent. She is a great vocalist, and there is some nice production here. There are some tracks that I really do enjoy. But what we see here, especially starting from the first track here, Brutal, we kind of get one of the more concise, straightforward tracks that I really like how it opens up. There's a serene string opening that could have been maybe played around with more or reintroduced at some point in the track, but we kind of just go into like this straightforward pop rock track that's structured by this repetitive guitar riff that maybe has been borrowed from other pop punk or pop rock guitar riffs from the Disney Channel vein or the 2000s at various points in time. But either way, it just kind of has the gist of this. This track just kind of has the gist of being a song that maybe could have been presented on the Battle of the Bands scene from Scott Pilgrim versus the World. It's just kind of that thing. It sounds like it was made to be a track presented in a movie that really no one thinks about afterwards. But I appreciate the energy that is presented. Take into consideration this was the opener. It attempts to be a bit angsty. The subject matter of the lyrics really bring that out. The guitar riff, the song really revolves around. Like, I've been kind of pointing down to it. It can feel a bit worn out though. It's honestly, it could be maybe a few cents short of as being good as maybe an oversimplified Arctic Monkeys guitar riff from somewhere around their debut album. Essentially, it just kind of gives the sense that this might be a color by the numbers sort of pop rock track, but I'm not really sure what else to think. It's fine, I guess. But we do get a more sensitive track afterwards with Trader that I guess might have a bit more depth to it. This is just one that feels honestly similar to like the most recent Julian Baker album. The instrumental sounds like it was practically from that last album in a sense. The tempo, the pacing, it's quite similar, but I think she's done a bit better than this. There are other tracks on this that I think she's just made better songs, honestly. If we're being honest, later we'll get to Deja Vu and Good For You. The build-up that this track leads up to is just a bit predictable and just a little ineffective. I'm not sure what to think other than maybe it just sounds like, a less sophisticated Julian Baker track, maybe some similarity to one of the slower Christina Perri piano ballads. But after that, we kind of just stay more around the piano-centric, aesthetic that she goes for many times with Driver's License. And honestly, Driver's License, it's gotten a little bit better since when I first heard it. I wasn't really all that impressed when I first reviewed it on Best and Worst Track of the Week. If I'm going back to my original thoughts, they haven't really changed. I'm not too fond of the generic piano instrumental with the cheap percussive elements that are supposed to sound like hand claps. Also, the annoying use of the one note played over and over on the piano in an eighth note pattern that just kind of feels a bit uninteresting and unnecessary past a certain point. Hate the annoying kick drums that are presented on the second verse. They're a bit bland. Great vocal performance on this track, though, especially on moments where she really goes for the belting. She really exemplifies her chops on here. But when we get more, I guess, developed moments where synths come in, it just sounds cheap. There's a sub bass on here that's pretty ineffective and distracting and maybe abrupt at times. It definitely, in my opinion, still tries to rip off of Lana Del Rey's, style with these grand gang vocal moments the track builds up to later in the bridge that really just essentially reminds me of what was being presented on Ultraviolence, one of Lana's better known albums. It's nowhere near as effective as what was happening on that album. And I'm not sure how this goes anywhere past being maybe a predictable piano-centric singer-songwriter type of track. And then after that track, we take a interesting step with the track One Step Forward, Three Steps Back. It's a bit of a curveball, especially after hearing Driver's License. It's a bit more stripped down. It's not as flashy. Immediately when I heard it, it reminded me of Taylor Swift's Folklore album, with it being, of course, piano-centric, with a light keyboard instrumental that just essentially fills out the track. Lyrically, it sounds like a Taylor Swift song, and there's good reason for that because she interpolated essentially one of the tracks from Folklore for this instrumental on this track. But overall, I mean, it was maybe a bit more listenable than maybe some of the other stuff thus far in the album, but it was just a little bit too stripped down for my liking. But, after that, we do get an improvement. We have my favorite track on this album with Deja Vu. This, in my opinion, I really think it would have been a more solid project from front to back. Not saying every track should have sounded like it, but there's something that works on here. There's a nice sparkly backdrop with the electronic elements, going along with the opening vocals. There's a shimmering color on here. Thus far, this is the most vibrant thing that we've gotten on this album, and we're almost halfway through. Essentially, when we get to certain points where she goes into the line, "When you gonna tell her," the sudden falsetto take on the vocals is, in my opinion, totally Lorde-inspired, but it's tastefully used. I admittedly like the messy lo-fi trash can drum track that comes in on the second verse. It gives the track a rougher nature. It makes it a bit rawer. The simple, thin guitar line accents the track nicely when it's presented as well. And if we're comparing it to the other hit, Driver's License, in my opinion, stylistically, this is just a better take on, I don't know, whatever she's trying to do on this album. If she's trying to go for being an indie pop star, go in this direction. It's just a more energetic track. It's executed with a bit more angst. It's more concise and to the point. It's more interesting sonically. So yeah, I thought, this was a highlight on the album. And then we get another highlight, but I don't know if it's a highlight in the sense that I really love this track. Good For You. Another track that borrows the vocals that are a bit similar to Lord, I think, especially with the opening verse. They're gritty and a bit angry, but angry in a subtle way. Can definitely hear the vocals being a bit strained on the chorus, but I think that's kind of the point, kind of leaving it all out when we get to that in the track. The rhythmic guitar on this chorus, in my opinion, it's just presented in a bit thin and watery way. It's a bit ineffective. And honestly, when I was listening to this, it sounded like something else. I couldn't put my finger on it. And I think a lot of people ended up comparing it to Paramore's Misery Business. And obviously, yeah, I mean, if we're saying this is a pop punk track, we have a very talented female vocalist, here, and of course Misery Business was sung by at this point Hayley Williams, that most people should know at this point what she's capable of, but I don't really think compositionally it's really all that similar to Misery Business, as much people have said. I don't know if that's what I was thinking in my subconscious, but I don't think this track is anywhere in any shape or form as presentable or competent as a classic like Misery Business. That's just my opinion. In my opinion, this track just kind of presents some predictable and generic rock tropes on here. It's passable, and I will say the more I listen to this track, when we got to the instrumental breakdown, it's probably the best part on this track, and maybe one of the best parts on the album. It ended up growing me on a bit, but it's a bit short and it isn't really taken anywhere else other than a few measures of, just some typical pop punk breakdown. But yeah, after Good For You is done with, the album takes a bit of a, abrupt turn to a sort of folk, a folk-centric sort of aesthetic, where immediately after that we have a track, Enough For You. It sounds almost country-like. It's just missing twang. She's not a country vocalist, and I don't think she's trying to be, but it maybe unintentionally has that sort of gist. It's kind of just has the same thing going that maybe a Taylor Swift breakup song in her earlier material would have had. And not to dig again on Good For You, but I can kind of hear Olivia sounding a bit like Hayley Williams at this point on the vocals. I don't think that's the point of the track, but I think that's just what the track has going for it. I didn't really take too much other than that. Honestly, after that, it doesn't get any better with Happier. This is probably one of the more bare tracks that honestly, it just had a bunch of predictable moments. Some predictably used synth strings on the climatic moment. It kind of just sounded like a bad Conan Gray track. I think it kind of seemed like it was maybe going for being an Adele type of track with the piano instrumentation and the resentful lyrics, but in my opinion, it just didn't sound anywhere near as captivating as most Adele tracks. After that, we get maybe a better moment where we get another solid track, Jealousy, more of like a contemporary alternative music type of direction, sounding like Bishop Briggs or Alice Merton. The vocal harmony moments that are on this track are quite beautiful when they're implemented. It's probably one of the more mature tracks I've heard on this album as well. The groove that structures everything, especially on the chorus, is quite captivating. There's an angsty attitude on here that I think just works. It's not forced. It just naturally happens. This is another track that I really wish maybe the album presented more of and maybe went more in this direction. I think it could have made it more of a solid project. And then we kind of just have more of these sensitive tracks to end everything with Favorite Crime. I heard maybe a bit more Lord similarity here too, especially with the vocals on the bridge and the chorus. There is a nice tension that's created throughout the chorus as well. It's paced nicely. The climatic moment we get with the more pronounced vocals on the last chorus too are quite nice. A nice emotional catharsis that's brought out. So I think the folk-centric, indie folk, sort of aesthetic that was trying to be put on this album was maybe worked a bit on Favorite Crime. But unfortunately, on the last track, Hope You're Okay, this was just a head scratcher. I do like the message of the track about confronting friendships that she knew are no longer really there as they were before, but she still hopes these people that have suffered trauma in the past are doing okay, and that she is essentially still their friend, even though they're not as close anymore. I do like the sentiment on there. But what's presented musically, we do have an interesting effect with like this effect-driven ukulele or mandolin. I can't really tell what it is. I just never really heard anything used like that before. It's just really dry. If we're getting down to like the texture on that, it just doesn't really blend in with much of the other sound on the track. There's a muddy bass track that can be a bit unflattering too. That does at times provide some warmth to the track. But in my opinion, it just kind of sounds like maybe Casey Musgrave's Light with the slight country stylization on the track too. It's very light and I guess stripped down, organic instrumentation at points. We get like a curveball at some point on this track with the at this point formulaic Lana Del Rey Ultraviolence card that's played like she did on Driver's License. It happens again on the bridge, and I think it was just trying to present itself in a way that was trying to be overly mature, but it ended up feeling like a one of the more elongated Julian Baker tracks from the last album that we're just really dragging this thing out. This track maybe just could have used a bit more trimming and refinement. Just not sure. It was just kind of there. And it wasn't a good way, in my opinion, to end this album, especially when a lot more engaging, energetic tracks exist on it. So, but yeah, overall, those are just my thoughts on the album. I do think there's certainly a lot of nice moments. Like I said, again, Deja Vu, great track. Jealousy, Jealousy, I would have liked to hear that a lot more. But there's just some head scratchers on here. If we're going back to like the first track, Brutal, it had a lot of potential, but when do we hear something really like this again? I mean, you can make the argument that Good For You was another angsty rock track, but it's taken in a completely different direction. But after that, what else do we really get? It's not really that focused on being a pop rock album after that. We just get a bunch of piano-centric singer-songwriter sort of tracks that feel a bit adult alternative or folk-like at times. It's just not really all that focused. But yeah, once we get past the fact that there's really not all that much rock on here, and it seems like she's being championed a lot for when she goes about that direction. There's 75% of this album is just not that. It's, these adult alternative singer-songwriter, piano-centric, sort of predictable songs that aren't really all that engaging, in my opinion. They're just kind of there, floating around. At some points I thought it worked. For instance, Favorite Crime, I thought, at some point that kind of worked, but at many points it's just a bit too stripped down or simple, such as on One Step Forward or Three Steps Back. Or with the track Happier, that sort of goes for similar styles of artists that do this sort of thing, but goes nowhere to make her version of it as exciting or captivating. Just a bit mixed on here. If I had to rate it, I'd give it a 5 out of 10. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as recent albums that I was rating around the 6 range, but I also don't think this album is bad either. It's just kind of there, and it had a lot of potential, but sadly I don't think it really used used all of its potential. But hey, it's just a debut album. I do think Olivia Rodrigo is a great vocalist, a great songwriter on many points on this album. So the sky's the limit. But yeah, those are just my thoughts. But yeah, if you stuck with me to the end of the review, thanks for listening. My name's Josh. I'll be reviewing some more music soon. If you're on YouTube, like and subscribe. If you dig in what you hear, if not, just leave a comment, good or bad. Subscribe on your preferred listening service as well. But other than that, that was Sour by Olivia Rodrigo. I'll see you guys later.